Hi, I'm Bill Scher.
And I'm Matt Lewis.
And you're in the DMZ.
That's right, the DMZ.
So on the last show, as we attempt to make this seem like more like a show, and amp up the professionalism, we thought perhaps that a theme song would be beneficial. Preferably a classic 1980s TV theme song style theme song.
Right. And I'm sorry, let me jump in and say, before we get to the theme song, this reminds me of something that alarmed me here at the Daily Caller yesterday. President Obama said something that he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So I immediately think of silver spoons. And I went out to outside my office and I started asking the people I work with if they knew what silver spoons was. Nobody has heard of silver spoons. I was nobody in my office. You work with? They're born in 1988 or something.
That's quintessential Reagan era sitcom.
Well, never mind their age. What's up with our educational system if they're not being taught this? I mean, and look, if they're not learning it in the home, then maybe they need to learn it in school.
Well, the problem here is that you no longer, because of the fractured cable TV environment, there's no few networks that are constantly repeating old sitcoms all day long. So when you're homesick when you're a kid, that you get that education, you get your Gilligan's Island and your Facts of Life and your Mr. Belvedere.
Exactly.
Now that doesn't happen anymore.
You know, the whole world's gone to hell. But anyway, I'm proud that we have these really good listeners who. They're not just passive listeners who just watch or listen to the show, but they're involved. And,
we didn't even ask for submissions.
I think I might have hinted that it would be nice, but...
Right, but it wasn't like an official contest. Everyone sent it to this address. Winner gets autographed copy of our brilliant books.
But despite that, we have gotten a couple of people emailing us and contacting us, so kudos to them. And we're going to play some of them. We're going to
try to do this. We're with the good folks at Blogging Heads HQ. We're going to drop in a couple clips. So, first one was actually a written-out song for us. Brand new lyrics. By Eli Rector.
And this one really sounds like it could be. It reminded me of Welcome Back, Kotter a little bit. Is what it reminded me of.
And he has a blog called Super, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Vidoco, which is Super Vidoqo. And here is his DMZ theme.
It's the DMZ. They're just like you and me. Just a couple of guys in harmony.
All right, just a little taste from Eli Rector, and we also.
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to beat that.
Well, the other one was not something written especially for us. This is Fingers Del Rey, fingersdelrey.com, fingersdelrey.com. He's an instrumentalist. He thought maybe having lyrics was not the way to go. Did not bring the seriousness of purpose that we aspire to on the DMZ. And so he has a whole. So he said, "If there's anything on my website that you think you could use that. Or if you want me to write something for you directly, let me know." But here's a sample of one of his songs. This is actually called "Hold Tight." There you have it, Fingers Del Rey.
Yes.
Two totally different approaches to how the theme song could go.
And that's what I like, that they didn't, you could tell that stylistically it was different, a different feel. I suspect that there are others out there who now may want to get involved. I think it would be maybe irresponsible, maybe premature of us to pull the trigger on this. It's such a big decision. We spent weeks, if not months, debating the name of this show. And I think, the theme song probably deserves about as much if not more attention.
And as you can ascertain, if you want a cheap plug for something, here's the way to get it.
We're not going to send you. There are no T-shirts or books, so don't expect that. But maybe, you know what? I do have right here. I'll hold it up. A bobblehead. Look at this. A Matt Lewis bobblehead. This actually looks a lot like me. I don't know how it's going to look in the light.
Get your Christmas shopping done early.
It's a Matt Lewis bobblehead. I won't send you that, but theoretically, it's the kind of thing you could get if you were selected.
But back to our usual chat. Your most recent post is very positive towards Romney's strategic approach to the race. So here you are, Matt Lewis, indisputable. Pure conservative. No one can question your bona fides. You've never been in the tank for Romney during the primary process. But you're suggesting now that he's doing something right as far as his stylistic approach that is rallying conservatives behind him. And I assume that's this phase of the campaign for him is about that sort of base consolidation. Am I right?
Well, I think that was a concern. There was certainly a concern early on that he wouldn't be able to rally. Just weeks ago, I'm sure we had segments on this. Will conservatives ever come to Mitt Romney? Will there be a convention fight? Will there be a brokered convention? So we spent weeks or months talking about that. And very quickly after Rick Santorum dropped out, conservatives have generally coalesced around Romney. And I think it's mainly, the first thing that I think really did it was that Hillary Rosen comment, which I thought was a little bit lame, that conservatives, really went after the whole war on moms thing. But be that as it may, that really, the fact that they attacked, the fact that conservatives perceived that there was an attack on stay-at-home moms and Romney, really allowed them to coalesce around Romney. And now the latest thing is a story broken by my colleague Jim Treacher, who noted in, Barack Obama and David Axelrod and others have been, making fun of Mitt Romney over Seamus the dog, the dog that Romney put on the roof of his car. And my colleague pointed out that in Obama's book, it says that he actually ate dog when he was a boy. I guess it was in Indonesia. That's also silly, but turnabout's fair play, and so conservatives have really rallied. And Jim Gary over at National Review pointed out that Mitt Romney is already taking the fight to Obama in a way that John McCain wouldn't. John McCain didn't want to go negative, and at least the perception, whether or not it's true, the perception of conservatives is that he held his punches and he was afraid to really fight Obama. And my theory is, and we've talked about this before, Bill, that the definition of conservatism has nothing to do with philosophy or voting record. It has everything to do with rhetoric. And so a classic example is Alan West, who has a measly 64% rating on the Club for Growth scorecard. And yet people think he's this uber conservative. And it's because he, says that Democrats are communists and he attacks Obama all the time. So Republicans conflate harsh rhetoric with conservative philosophy. Now,
but it's interesting you're saying that, because I feel Romney is analogous to McCain in that there are lines that Romney's not going to cross in going after Obama. Romney never takes the bait and calls Obama a socialist, for example. When he's asked the question point blank, he always has an answer that, and the word socialist do not cross his lips. When Ted Nugent made his comments this week, his spokesperson said, we need to be civil and not use that kind of rhetoric. And McCain, McCain didn't have a wholly positive campaign. He had a whole series of ads calling him an empty suit celebrity, for example. But he had some resistance on saying he was palling around with terrorists, which his running mate did not have the same hesitation towards, and some of that friction in the two camps, became public. And I assume, and there was the more famous example when someone in one of his town halls said to McCain that he's a Muslim, and McCain corrected her. This was very close to the end of the race. So yes, McCain had his bounds. But I think Romney has his bounds too, just that we haven't seen him hit those. He hasn't bumped up against those bounds in the past week. What he's done in the past week has been throwing more elbows.
Right. Well, let me say, I think you're right, and the truth in the real world is always much more messy than narratives. And the truth of the matter is that Republicans have gone on the offense. The Hillary Rosen thing, she obviously made a gaffe and opened herself up to Republicans, I think, blowing it out of proportion. But that was still Republicans playing defense a little bit. In the case of the eating dog thing, that wasn't the Romney campaign. It was a Daily Caller blogger who wrote the story, and it was very fortunate for Romney. So you're right. It could be that a week from now, Romney is back to being milquetoast. But I would say that in the past week, conservatives and Republicans have been excited and motivated, and they have rallied around him. And a lot of it, I believe, is because the perception that Romney is taking the fight to Obama, that he's putting Obama on the defense, that he's playing tough, and even if he doesn't invent or if his campaign doesn't originate the attacks, they're certainly jumping on them. They're not being civil and weak, which is the worst thing you can be if you're a Tea Party conservative.
No, and it's interesting that you say that, because and I wonder, it's hard to know, it's hard to have historical memory about these sorts of things. But has it always been the case that conservatives were more interested in posture than policy positions in terms of sizing up your sincerity in terms of your ideology? So on the left, I feel there was a shift in attitude about that in 2004, where historically the liberal purity tests, were about checking off issue boxes, and it was when Howard Dean gave one of his early speeches, actually 2003, saying, starting off a speech at a DNC event, saying, "I want to know why the Democratic Party, not standing up to George Bush on Iraq."
Right. I'm from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party.
Right. But I mean, and that was a line from Paul Wellstone. Paul Wellstone always was, a hardcore liberal. Dean, as governor of Vermont, was always seen as a budget balancing centrist.
By the way, I like Howard Dean. I spent a bit of time with him in the green room at MSNBC and CNBC, and he's pretty much a fiscal conservative. I think he's probably
his record.
A social liberal.
No one expected him to run a presidential campaign as a liberal flag waver.
Yeah.
And because his pugnacious approach was so refreshing in the eyes of the Democratic base, that people did not get hung up about whatever policy positions he currently had or had in the past that weren't orthodox liberal. And ever since then, I feel that people have put more of an emphasis on style.
That's a great point. That's a great point, because Dean's harsh rhetoric covered a multitude of sins, and it made it impossible to attack him for being too conservative.
I think the flip side of that is, people could argue Obama different ways, of course. I would argue that Obama has been, very tough as far as getting as much legislation, long-term reform legislation through Congress as possibly could be done. It was not a timid incremental agenda, but because his demeanor is often very tries to be post-partisan, tries to be conciliatory, tries to you're seeing maybe less partisan restraint now because we're revving up into campaign season, but over the course of the 3 years, lots of attempts to try to lower the temperature. Folks on the left, still harbor a resentment or a skepticism or a criticism that Obama's not tough. It doesn't know how to fight, these relentless obstructionist, and that's something that he has to. That friction between him and the left, is going to persist. I don't know if it's going to go to him on election day, but
I think you make some very good points. I would say on the left, I understand how this happened. I don't know. Ironically, I don't know the history of the right how this happened so well. But on the left, I think what happened is this whole thing started in 1988 with Michael Dukakis and the whole Willie
Horton
thing, and the perception
among many other attacks that was launched on him at the time.
The perception that Dukakis was going to be above punching back, and that by being too nice and too civil and too intellectual, that Republicans, Lee Atwater and the Republicans killed Dukakis. In response to that, you had Bill Clinton, who I think, by the way, the fact that he could be very tough, and he's got this swagger, but Clinton also had a kind of a macho side where he could just kind of kick your butt a little bit. I think that covered his conservatism a little bit, his moderation a little bit, that swagger, that when you pushed him, he could push back twice as hard, and he kind of had a little bit of fight. I will take this pen. Let me tell you. I mean, he could be funny and jovial and affable, but then he could turn and cut you. And I think that covered the fact that he was a DLCer a little bit. So, and then, Dean, I think, tapped into some of that zeitgeist a little bit. The other Democrats were afraid. They'd been around. They were probably a little bit poisoned by having been in the national process, and they were very worried that if they didn't support the war in Iraq, that they would get burned. Dean had really nothing to lose, so he could take this interesting tack and carve out a unique niche, and it worked. And eventually Kerry and others co-opted that message and ended up going on the attack and ratcheting up their rhetoric. So I get it on the left. I sort of think I understand historically how we've arrived at this point. On the right, I don't know. I will say this: I think there is an interesting historical parallel that I've been thinking about, and I haven't written about it yet because it's always dangerous to compare people to historical figures. But let me throw this out. What the hell? I think that people like my late friend Andrew Breitbart are sort of like Thomas Paine, and people like me and others like me are more like Edmund Burke. And if you remember, Burke and Paine had been friends, but they were also bitter enemies over the French Revolution. They both were, Paine obviously was a patriot and very much attacked the British and obviously stoking the revolution. Burke was a British parliamentarian, but he wanted, he was very conciliatory and in many ways pro-American. So I would argue that both were like pro-liberty, pro-freedom. In the long run, I would argue that Burke had a much more significant impact on conservatism. But in the short term, Paine's harsh rhetoric inspired and fired up the patriots, angered them at the British, and really, helped light the fuse that led to the revolution. And I would argue that both guys were really on the same team, and both are, I would consider to be heroes, but they were very different temperamentally. And you could see that the people who were like Thomas Paine supporters might look down their noses and think that, like, the Edmund Burkes of the world are too philosophical kind of wimps. Again, I would argue that Burke had a much probably longer lasting, you could argue, impact on conservatism in the future. But it's debatable. It's debatable. I mean, so having said that, like I said, I hesitated to bring that up, but I'll just throw it out to you to see what you maybe you think we're Marx and Engels instead. I don't know.
Well, I think on any team you're going to have people. Your best teams have people who play the game differently, but find a way to make it to have them complement each other. you want to have some firebrands and you want to have some compromisers, but having the same strategic goal where you have a problem is when folks get so self-righteous about their particular style, or in some cases a pet issue, that they make it impossible to work with others who share their basic beliefs. And so, we always try to ascertain, both on the left and the right, are the coalitions breaking apart? Will the left abandon Obama because they're mad about this or that? Will the right abandon Romney because he hasn't been consistent on various positions? And I think what we're seeing so far, and you're attributing to his approach right now, which I'm not discounting, but also there's just the reality of the teams coalescing when there is a common enemy in their midst. And so I think a lot of the criticism on the left of Obama is starting to die down because we're in the general election season. The criticism on the right of Romney is starting to die down because they want to stop Obama. And you're not seeing. I think the right has been more fractured over the past 3 years than we've seen in a long time, but it would appear that it's not so fractured that they're not going to, join in battle to try to stop Obama right now. And the left, I would argue, probably as fractured as they are, it's certainly not the nadir of their fracturedness over the last 30 years.
Let me say,
but I think.
I think you're right about conservatives want to beat up Obama, and they're like that. We've always known. In fact, I've argued that it's going to be a negative campaign. That the only way to motivate conservatives is to beat up Obama. But I think there's something more to it than that, which is that if Romney shows conservatives that he is willing to beat up Obama, they will confuse that with liking him and with believing he is conservative. And what that could actually do, interestingly, if Romney wants an Etch-a-Sketch moment, if he actually wants to go to the center, this could give him cover to do it. As long as...
You think he's going to do, a Sister Soldier type thing? He's going to pick someone on the right to take a swipe at and say, I'm not like them. Don't lump me in that camp. I'm in the mainstream of America.
Maybe that's not what I'm getting at, although I wouldn't discount it. What I'm getting at is he can go moderate on policy as long as he is attacking Obama rhetorically. So, in other words, Romney can make a play for independence and try to soften some of his policy stances and get away with it because he will be placating the base simply by being perceived as being tough and fighting hard and running a good campaign. Because conservatives, just like liberals, still waking up in cold sweats and nightmares about the way that Dukakis didn't fight back, conservatives are uber sensitive about the way that John McCain, they perceive, wasn't willing to really go after Obama. Now, as you know, some of this is like mythology, but it doesn't really matter what the truth is. It matters what the perception is. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this. I think it's an interesting moment in time, and if Romney keeps this up, it'd be very good for him, but I don't know if he can or if he will.
Now, to shift topics slightly and continue our conversation from last week, what kind of campaign is Obama going to run? You suggested in a recent post that Obama is running on a politics of envy.
Yes.
And you also suggested you think it could work. That you don't like it. You think it's sort of bad for the nation's soul, but you think it has political juice.
Yeah. I do. So,
where you left off.
Okay, so basically, when you talk about the 99% versus the 1%, the Buffett rule, which everyone knows isn't going to pass, but talks about fairness and equality, and you talk about like Obama says, "I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth." All of these things are done to essentially pit, to remind people Mitt Romney's rich, he's out of touch, he's different than you. And I think it sort of stirs up bitterness and enmity and envy with the public. And I think that's very unhealthy. I think it's unhealthy from a macroeconomic perspective because, the extreme sort of result of that would be some sort of confiscatory policies where you spread the wealth around, and obviously I don't think that's good or right. But more importantly, I think that free markets make us richer, and even poor people become richer when a country becomes richer. So I think that there's certainly a macro problem with it. But the thing I looked at in my Daily Caller blog as well is sort of the personal standpoint. Envy is one of the 7 deadly sins. I don't want to confuse people. Sometimes people they think I'm talking about ambition or zeal, which can be very healthy. But envy, I would look to Thomas Aquinas' definition, which is essentially that envy is Schadenfreude, pathos. It's not enough for you to want to be successful, but you want to bring other people down to your level. And I think that's very, very, very unhealthy for individuals to sort of
But I challenged some of the premises there, but before I get into that, despite all that, you think it might be politically effective anyway?
I do, and I try to separate. I always try to, as a political analyst, I always try to separate like what I think is good or bad from what I think will work or won't work. And it just so happens that a lot of things that I think are not necessarily healthy for the nation and for democracy really work in politics. And I think that both campaigns are trying to pit, at least subtly, or not trying to pit, but trying to characterize their opponent as being different, not like you. And I think that Americans, by and large, unlike other countries, haven't gotten caught up so much in this. But there is a populist thing, a resentment for people who are rich. And so I think if you're Obama, it's not a bad card to play, to try to cast Romney as being for the rich. And, again, I think it's harmful, and for political discourse, but it's probably one of the cards Obama has, and it's probably smart to play it.
I would make a distinction between someone who is trying to stir up envy and someone trying to argue an opponent is out of touch. I don't think they're the same. And I think if someone was trying to stir up envy, saying someone in a certain class doesn't deserve elective office or is disqualified for elective office, I don't think that would be effective. I think that there would be a huge backlash if that was, the stated goal of what you were trying to argue. And it's factually wrong. Both parties have plenty of people who've been elected to office who are very wealthy. And I think Obama, you might dispute how sincere he is when he says these sorts of things, or argue that he still wants the underlying goal to be to stir up envy. But Obama goes to great lengths in the rhetoric to say, we don't criticize success. We want to see people succeed and move up. We want to trumpet what they've accomplished. He actually has not chosen to use the 99 versus 1% rhetoric from Occupy. If he's ever used those percentages before, it's always been the literal context of a tax policy. He's never talked about broadly saying, I'm in the 99, let's go stick it to the 1%. He always stopped short of that. Now, I do think he wants to make a personal case towards Romney that Romney is out of touch. He doesn't understand the concerns of voters like you. I mean, he obviously is saying I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth to suggest there's something about Romney who, not that simply that he is wealthy, period, but that he is wealthy in such a way that he hasn't had any kind of understanding or exposure to what it's like to not be in his position and come up with policies that are sympathetic to that. Obama's not saying this, flat out, but FDR was massively wealthy, and
so was John Kerry.
What's that? John Kerry. I mean, look, there's all sorts of Kennedy. I mean, there's plenty of people you can point to, but I mean, I just know one thing about FDR, which was before. Between the time he ran for vice president in 1920 and ran for president in 1932, he got hit with polio, and people thought his political career was over, and he founded a whole sort of spa retreat in rural Georgia to try to heal, and in doing so, got exposed to a lot of rural poverty that hadn't been exposed to before. That really changed his political thinking. So when he talked, even though he came from a very wealthy background, people didn't presume he didn't get it, that he wasn't heavily disqualified to talk about those sorts of issues because he displayed some understanding. And Romney has every ability. I mean, if you want to stop that narrative that Obama's putting out there, then you got to show that you get it. And I mean, that's fully in Romney's power to do that. Just the same way when people on the right have tried to attack Obama as being somewhat foreign or you use less than incendiary type things. When early in 2008, when he got mocked for saying coming on the high price of arugula, that was a huge trope on the right. This shows that he's some sort of a fat limousine liberal type. But I think Obama's general demeanor, he doesn't come across that way.
Right.
So that narrative didn't stick.
All right, a couple things. One, I agree with you that Romney's demeanor and style help reinforce this problem, and it's not just a problem in the general. It was a problem in the primary too. I'm less concerned about the election than I am about, or I'm less concerned about attacking Romney than I am about the general vibe that Obama's putting out. And let me say, some of it may be a Rorschach test. You may see it differently than I do, but I don't hear Obama inspiring people with hope and change and telling people you can be successful. If you work hard, you can be successful. I hear him saying these speculators are driving up, these mythical speculators are driving up the price of gasoline. That's why gas prices are high. And yes, there's a deficit problem, but do you know why? It's because people like, rich people are paying a lower tax rate than their own secretaries. We got to be mad at the rich people who are paying a lower rate. We have to punish them, and these speculators. This is an attempt to create boogeymen to solve problems. Because number one, the Buffett rule would do nothing to fix the deficit, and there may be some speculators who are bad actors, but that is not the reason that gas prices are high, and he knows it.
Well, I think in both of those cases, I mean, to your point, you could argue that it's irrelevant the various qualifiers that Obama puts on things because perhaps the political point is to gin up this sort of divisiveness, and therefore, who cares if he is saying other things separate to that? So. So there's definitely an eye of the beholder element to it. But as far as what Obama is literally saying, he specifically says the buffer rule is not the silver bullet to the deficit, and even ending the Bush tax cut is not the silver bullet to the deficit. You have to do a whole host of other things, but that should be part of the puzzle. That if you don't have that piece, the pain you got to deliver to others is far too steep. This is the way to spread the burden. On oil speculators, he explicitly said the bigger solution is reducing demand for fossil fuels and ramping up clean energy. But short of that, here's something else we can do to keep gas prices lower now.
Right. But
he's trying to make the more holistic argument. But I think the way it gets put out in the press is that they're going to cherry pick the one element of it that's sort of new.
Okay, I think you're right. I think you're right that there are always qualifiers, and you could always find a line where he says this isn't the whole story, but I think where we differ is you think that the press is controlling it. I think that this is what he wants the press to report. I think that when you hold a Rose Garden or whatever press conference about speculators, and you give a speech, and 90% of the speech is about speculators, and you happen to throw in, it's not the only problem, but then I think it is reasonable to assume that that's going to be the news story. So I think that he is intentionally perpetuating these myths. And by the way, there is a common theme to all of them, as you know. Every single one of these, the Buffett rule, which again was brought up, and everybody knew it wasn't going to pass, but it reminds people of the rich people. And to me, the problem is that if you're out there, if you're a voter, you're not being told you can be successful, just work harder, play by the rules, we're going to turn this thing around together. The message is they're not letting you. I want to help you, but those rich people and those speculators, that's the message I see. Now, we may see it differently.
I personally, I don't think Obama's trying to, I don't think Obama wants that to be the crude message that you're characterizing. I think what he wants it to be, and it's debatable, I don't think it would be effective the way you're characterizing it. I think if that's all Obama wanted to accomplish, I think he would. There just was a political story about the persuadables. Who are the actual swing voters that Obama and Romney have to appeal to go beyond their bases? And their premise was there are two camps of these voters. There's sort of white non-college working class, and there are upper income social liberal fiscal conservatives. And I think the crudest version of populism that you're painting there, maybe it gets you the white non-college voters. It's not going to get you the upper income fiscal conservative voters. That's not the way to thread that needle of appealing to both camps. And I think Obama's trying to thread that needle. He's not trying to pit one against the other. He wants to win votes from both of those sides. If you want to win a swing state like Colorado and a swing state like Ohio, you've got to play to both those camps. So he's trying to say, this is where the Buff rule thing I think is interesting. Yes, it does not raise all that much revenue by itself, but as a matter of basic principle, if you can't say that someone earning $2 million a year should at minimum pay a higher rate than someone who's working class 1, and 2, a rate that is the basic rate of the top bracket. The Bush tax cuts lowered the top bracket from 39.6% to 35%. And all the Buff rule does is says, after all your deductions, you got to pay at least 30%.
Right.
But it doesn't say you got to pay 50. It says you got to pay 30.
And that's very.
So it's a pretty low bar of class warfare.
Well, and that sounds very commonsensical, but I would add that a lot of the people who the Buffett rule, maybe the majority, but a lot of the people that the Buffett rule would hit, the reason that they pay a lower rate is that they derive most of their earning from capital gains.
Right.
And we have decided, as a society, that, and maybe you disagree with this, there are conservatives.
Well, this is the debate. This is the actual debate right here. Keep going.
Yeah. No one's having this debate, but there are conservatives who disagree with this as well. But we have decided that we should tax capital gains at a lower rate than regular, salaried earned income. And presumably, there is a logical reason for this, which is that we want to encourage investment and people, taking these risks and investing in entrepreneurial activities. And people like Mitt Romney, by the way, he's retired. The guy's 65 years old. when he was earning a salary, he would have been taxed at a different rate. But if the majority of his income comes from tax. So, in other words, there could be unintended consequences. It is possible that the Buffett rule could result in less economic growth because it would disincentivize people putting their money in capital gains. The other thing too, and then I'll shut up for a minute, is I believe it's true, at least Steve Ratner said on Morning Joe, that the reason President Obama paid a lower tax rate than his secretary is that Obama gave away a lot of money to charity. And I guess that put him in a lower tax bracket than he would have been in. We as a society have decided that charitable contributions should be tax deductible.
Well, I'd also point out there, Obama has repeatedly argued that charitable deductions for the wealthiest should not be. There should be a limit on that.
But there could be unintended consequences to that.
Oh yeah, and there are a lot of nonprofits that are not happy with Obama's proposal on that for that very reason.
Right.
They thought they were going to have their funds dry up.
And some of these nonprofits are like quasi-political, but some of them like are looking to cure cancer,
sure,
or whatever.
But Obama, I mean, yes, your point about unintended consequences is a fair point of debate. Obama, at least, is consistent on the point that he thinks that, look, we have a long-term deficit problem. We got to do a whole bunch of things if we're going to solve it. What are the things that we do that would cause the least amount of damage to our overall economy? How can we spread it all out? And in the case of charitable deductions, Obama made the argument, it hasn't come to fruition yet because even Democrats opposed him in Congress, that there should be a limit on how much you can escape your tax responsibilities by giving money to charity. The wealthiest, should have a limit how much they can do that. In the case of capital gains, I think, the underlying message of the Buffett rule is, yes, as a general rule, you want to incentivize investment to keep, keep the blood flowing in the economic system. But if you're getting all of your income from capital gains and you're making that much money, perhaps you're not just simply feeding the free market system, you're gaming the free market system. And so maybe we should put a cap on that. Now, you could certainly argue that you make the unintended consequences point, but that is what that's the real policy debate there.
But that is, and this is what I hate about politics, and I don't want to blame Obama because he didn't invent this. But the game is never played, the debate is never had as we have just had it. That's why I love the DMZ. No one ever says, look, there's a reason why capital gains are taxed at a lower rate. We do it on purpose because we want to spur investment. But let's have a debate whether maybe that's wise, maybe it's not. But no one ever has that debate because it doesn't make sense to do so. Both sides have to keep their message simple. So if you're Obama, it's why does this guy pay more than pay less than his secretary? That's not fair.
You're absolutely right that Obama drove that argument and not the wonky argument. But I don't think the political point there is to let's get the pitchforks raised against the rich people. I think what he's trying to do is to say, I am serious about deficit reduction. I am willing to work across the aisle to achieve deficit reduction. But if these guys can't do this basic tiny step, that tells you I'm not dealing with good faith bargaining partners here, so don't blame me why this didn't get done.
It's funny, Bill, because you look at Obama and you see like the best, you sort of justify what he does, and you see the best of intentions and the best of motives. And
I think that's the intention.
In fairness, I probably look at what he does and see the worst of. I probably, maybe go too far the other way. Like I see, the worst of motives. So,
I just think if you're right and I'm wrong, and that's what Obama's doing, I think he would lose. I think if that is his actual thinking, he would suffer a good deal of backlash from that subset of swing voters that he needs to win. And I generally go from the premise that the Obama people, from Obama himself, all the way down on the staff level, are not stupid. They're trying to find a way to have messages that appeal both to folks who want to prime the pump and create jobs and have active government, dealing with the jobs crisis, and those folks who want to see a serious game plan to clamp down on the deficit. And there's tension between those two camps, demographically and substantively and whatnot. And Obama's trying to thread that needle. I don't think he is trying to throw one of those camps off the side and just have a base turnout strategy to win. I just don't think that's the game that they're playing.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, and I'd like to hear what our listeners and viewers think, because they're smart. There is the wisdom of crowds, and we have a very intelligent audience. And not only are they musically talented, but I read the comments, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. So what do you think? Let us know. Sound off on the DMZ.
You're part of the DMZ. The DMZ is not just this barren wasteland of two people.
Yeah.
They can be whole neighborhoods of folks.
And some of you may be on one side or the other of the DMZ, but you're still in the DMZ. So.
Well, should we end it on this note, Matt? Or do you
I
want
think
to get
so.
Okay.
I think it was a fun show. I think it was a good show, and why tempt fate? End on a high note, right? Go out on top.
All right. Keep the songs coming in.
Yes.
We're always willing to plug. And we're open for bribes. Bribes are good. And until next week, we'll catch you back in the DMZ.
That's right. Thanks, Bill.
Take care.